And welcome back to episode 2 of Project Monster Island. Last episode, we discussed the very first film to start it all in the Godzilla franchise, and that, of course, was Godzilla or Gojira from 1954. And today, I am joined by one of my good buddies, Tanner, from the Scarlet Writers Geek Corner. How you doing today, Tanner?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for joining us in this episode. Me and Tanner go way back. We actually used to work together a few years back. We worked at Target together, and I just remember we would always unload the trucks and we'd always talk about comic books and comic book movies and such. We had a good time working together, and he actually started doing YouTube videos before I did. But since I started, we've since collabed on several videos, and really excited to get a chance to collab again. We've normally talked about either Spider-Man or Batman or other comic books characters, but today we're talking about the King of Monsters. But yeah, Godzilla, King of the Monsters was released in 1956. It is the Americanization to the original Godzilla film from 1954. This one brought in some American actors, most notably the main character, played by Raymond Burr. He played a journalist named Steve Martin. No relation to the comedian. So before we get started, I was going to ask Tanner. Tanner, you told me whenever I asked you to be on this episode, you kind of gave a little insight into your experience with Godzilla. Do you mind letting us know, like, how familiar you are with the character?
So, in terms of familiarity, I'm not exactly an aficionado. I will say that, weirdly enough, well, let me start by saying that Godzilla Minus One was the first Godzilla movie I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'll be that guy. I'll be like, yeah, that was my entry point. I'll be the guy that's jumped in the last movie. Before that, this is weird. I don't know how I remember this. Have you ever seen the 1970s Hanna-Barbera Godzilla animated series?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that is actually probably the first Godzilla IP I've ever seen. Like, they're just memories vaguely. I think it was like 3 p.m. Monday through Friday. They would air that on the Cartoon Network, if I'm remembering correctly. And I don't remember it being great. I just remember being fascinated by it at like 5 years old. And I did watch a lot of it. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, you didn't interrupt at all. Yeah, I totally get what you're talking about. And I used to watch that quite a bit too. It was a very like Scooby-Doo tonal wise approach to Godzilla. And, it had like that very classic, up from the depths, 30 stories high theme song. And like I said, it got like a Scooby-Doo type approach because, Godzilla's now an uncle to his nephew Gazuki.
And I remember that. Wow.
And so, I think those episodes actually inspired the 90s Godzilla animated series. I don't know if you saw that. It aired on Fox, but it was kind of a similar approach where it was a group of people that were able to contact Godzilla, via like a device and everything. And they go on all these adventures around the world, and Godzilla shows up, fights monsters, But a little before we get started discussing the film, a little brief synopsis. Again, it's very similar to the original story from the 1954 film. A series of ships are being wiped from the ocean in a explosive sea of fire.
A Viking funeral.
Yeah, pretty much, exactly. Pretty much, yeah. And then we are introduced to our main character, Steve Martin. He is a foreign correspondent for United World News, and he's visiting his friend, Dr. Serizawa, in Japan. And when he immediately arrives, he's questioned by the police on if he remembers anything that took place during his flight, because his flight just happened to fly over the scene of where Godzilla destroyed the ship. And he, along with his police officer friend Tomo, do their own investigation, and they eventually arrive at Odo Island, and they discover the source of the all the destruction is Godzilla. And yeah, and Steve Martin kind of just narrates the events of the story, and yeah, Godzilla destroys things.
Yeah, that's why we're all here.
Yeah, that's exactly why we're all here. Is just like we see Godzilla show up, he destroys things, he burns things, and we're all happy. Sad for all the people that are actually there, but we're all happy to see.
I mean, the one of the what was it? The head producer of the Godzilla 1970s cartoon, what we were talking about a minute ago. His biggest complaint was he wanted to do all that stuff in the show, but they wouldn't let him. So
Right.
we're at Godzilla at its purest.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Yeah, and now that you mention it, it's been a while since I've seen it. I don't actually remember him destroying any cities.
Nope.
I think the most I've seen him in an actual city is in the opening credits, and that's about it.
I mean, like I said, we're talking about we're this is like the genesis of the whole kaiju monster tokusatsu genre right here.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhat, because this is the Americanized version, but I would say same movie, but it's not.
Right. And on that note, the biggest difference is, Tanner, have you seen the original 1954 film?
I had a hard enough time trying to watch this one for free. So unfortunately, I have not seen the original Japanese release. I do want to, because as I'm sure we'll get into later in this review, there's a lot of context that I'm missing, especially for a lot of scenes.
Well, yeah, for the most part, they cover everything that happened in the first film. It's very abridged in this one.
Oh yeah.
But one of the biggest differences is in this film, they find a way to add Steve Martin, Raymond Burr's character, like in the scene with the other actors that were featured in the first film. And, you know, I first saw Godzilla King of the Monsters when I was a kid, and I didn't actually see the original Japanese version until I was like in my mid-teens. And it's you notice things. There's like, I didn't notice it like when I was a kid, but you could and I just rewatched it the other day. You notice all of the different changes, and mostly with like Steve Martin like interacting with some of the characters.
Oh yeah.
Like you can, if he'd be talking to somebody that was from the first one, they would either be turned around or they would just like be like where he talks to Dr. Sarazawa on the phone, his, face is obscured by like some lab equipment or something, or a telephone, and and they just dubbed his voiceover with another actor. So I didn't notice it that much as a kid, but like I said, watching it, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah, just watching it as an adult, you definitely notice it's in, like we were talking about as a kid, like you're watching this just to see Godzilla destroy things, so you're not paying that much attention to it. But I'd have to say, it actually is, for the most part, a decent editing trick, and it's pretty well done in my opinion. I mean, it's noticeable.
Oh, it's noticeable if you know to look for it. I mean, I imagine it was probably a lot more passable in 1956 for people who just knew that they were clipping a foreign movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say they did do a good job, because I wouldn't say it was seamless. It was definitely noticeable, but it wasn't jarring. Like,
right.
It would be like, I'm dating myself here, but if anyone watches this, like if you watch Power Rangers in the 90s, you notice there was like, they did not edit the footage that great. So no. Here it's like, okay, they did it as seamless as they could for 1956.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I agree also with you on the Power Rangers thing, because being a kid of the 90s too, I grew up watching those Power Rangers. So that's a good comparison. I 100% agree. But it was during my rewatch where I noticed that there was times where they did the best they could, but it was mostly when you see at the beginning of the movie. Uh, it starts off with the day after Godzilla destroyed Tokyo, and Steve Martin is found amongst the ruins of the building that he's recording his narration of the event. And he's brought to the hospital, and he's talking to Emiko Yamane. And in the scene, it shows her looking down at him, but then whenever it cuts to her talking, like the original actress, she's like looking straight ahead. But then it cuts down and she's looking, the stand-in actress that is supposed to be playing her, you see her from behind and she's looking down at it again. So I was like, things like that. Like, I just like, oh, that's more noticeable now.
Oh yeah, it's one of those things where, like you'd have the double talking, speaking to him, and then of course they always have their back to him because they didn't film this in Japan. They filmed this in a sound studio, I think in Los Angeles, and I think Raymond Burr even said he like filmed all his scenes within like 24 hours, which makes sense. He's not like a super active character in the movie. He's effectively the audience surrogate.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is definitely noticeable, and it's like, okay, he's talking to Emiko stand-in, cuts to stock footage of her speaking from the original film. And I'm like, they did the best they could.
Yeah.
It was the 50s.
Yeah, and it's, like we said, for the time, it's actually not bad. It's pretty decent. This wasn't the last time that Raymond Burr would be in a Godzilla movie. In fact, they made a Godzilla film in the 80s. It's kind of one of those... it's like one of those sequels that is meant to be there to like replace all of the other sequels. So like the Godzilla films from the 60s and 70s. This one is... Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So it's the Superman Returns of Godzilla.
I was going to say that, but I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't. But yeah, I was like, like I was thinking it. You said it. Yep. Yeah, definitely the Superman Returns one, where it's like 30 years later, Godzilla returns, but there's like an original Japanese version that came out in 1984, and then there's one that came out that's called Godzilla in 1885, and that's the Americanization version, and it brings back Raymond Burr as Steve Martin.
I'd say they were pushing it to try to do that again 30 years later.
Yeah, it didn't work that great 30 years later, but that's a that's a review for another time. We'll get to there, guys. But so as a whole, Tanner, I was going to ask, what did you think?
Well, I did enjoy it. I will say that much. It does help that Toho pretty much did most of the work for them. So all the effects, beautiful, great, loved it. Godzilla was, for the 50s, terrifying enough. I'm sure children in 1954 in Japan were absolutely horrified seeing this. I thought the acting was fairly good. Not all the extras were great actors, but a lot of them were. This was probably their first role, excluding Raymond Burr, who was already an accomplished actor by then. I'm more referring to like the one-off extras, the Islanders. I do think that my expectations for this were, I don't want to say low. I will say I wasn't expecting the quality that I saw. I guess what I mean by that is the way it was edited, the way like Raymond Burr is there. He's effectively just the audience surrogate. He's basically the foreign audience watching the Godzilla movie.
Oh yeah,
take place. So his performance was fine. I mean, he did the best he could with what he was given, which was just react. Basically, just be a reaction streamer in 1955. So it's kind of hard to mess that up. I do say though that I think the biggest problem that I had with this movie was there's more to the story that I'm not seeing, and that story is Godzilla from 1954. So I feel like if I had watched that before I had watched this film, I feel like that missing context for some of the character arcs and the plot points that obviously do pay off in that movie I feel like I would probably feel a little bit more about it here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those, if I guess the best way to phrase this would be, if I saw the original film before this, I think I would have walked away with a higher opinion of this movie. Not to say that I didn't enjoy it. I did. I liked it a lot. But missing that context for the story and characters, I think did lower it a little bit. Because like I said, Raymond Burr is Steve Martin is the audience surrogate, and we're basically getting Godzilla 1954 abridged.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I'm right there with you. I saw this film first, and I always for a while I actually thought that this was the first Godzilla movie. And then when I found out, like, oh wait, there's actually, the original one that came before it. I was like, when I got older, I was like, oh, well, I want to watch that one. And it didn't kill this movie for me. I still enjoy it, to this day, but there's more to the whole. You kind of realize that there's a message to this, to that movie.
I feel like it got completely left out of this movie, and it actually was deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
Because, a lot of the kind of political times, they didn't want to talk about atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, so they had to they didn't want to go there, but it's like that was kind of the whole point of the original film. It's like, hey, nuclear weapons isn't good. We shouldn't have them, and because we did all that nuclear testing, it created Godzilla, and I guess they kind of touched on it towards the end with Sonozawa's air oxygen bomb.
Oh, the oxygen destroyer, yeah.
The oxygen destroyer. But it's one of those things where I feel like because they nerfed the message, it kind of feels a little hollow.
Yeah, it became more or less a monster movie, but I mean, both versions are a monster movie, but the first Godzilla film, it wasn't just like think of it more or less like Frankenstein. Godzilla is the Frankenstein monster. He was created by man, and in that story, man was the one that dealt with things that are beyond their control, that that could cause so much death and chaos and everything. So that was more or less like what the 1954 version was trying to say, is that, hey, if you mess around with these powerful weapons and everything that can cause so much destruction, the results could come back and bite you in the butt pretty hard, And go ahead.
Well, I was also going to say, the movie also is a stand-in for the feelings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not to get too real, but I mean, and again, you feel that I feel like that is a huge part of Godzilla's lore. That was a traumatic moment in human history.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's what Godzilla represents. It's like you said, this feels more like a monster movie than it does like a subtle message for sometimes mankind is the real monsters.
Yeah. In this version, they kind of just, Yamane, the voice actor who dubbed him, they briefly touch on the fact that Godzilla is a result of, the hydrogen bomb or something like that, but they don't
spend too much time on it.
No, they kind of just say, yeah, this is what's happened. Let's move on. And in the first film, though, it gets real and it gets dark. And I don't want to spoil it for you because I will say this. You probably remember there's a scene where a mother is holding her children.
Yeah.
And she's saying something to them. I'm not in the original version with the subtitles. Just watch that and then you'll see how dark it got. It's almost as dark and brutal as Godzilla -1. And we all know that one's a very intense movie. It's a beautiful movie.
Oh yeah. I was gonna say, can you imagine Speak being fluent in Japanese and watching this movie in 1956? Like you would see the Japanese actors speaking. You understand what they're saying, but it's not getting referenced but everyone else around you doesn't know what they're saying. So
Yeah.
you're feeling the gravity and darkness in it. So that line from that mother and her children, if you spoke Japanese and you understood Japanese, you knew exactly what she was saying.
Mm-hmm.
So it probably hit even harder.
Oh yeah. And on that note, one of the biggest flaws that I had was there was times where they would show a scene and they were speaking like the voice dub in English, and like mostly when Dr. Serizawa shows Emiko, the oxygen destroyer, it doesn't immediately show it. It just shows like her reaction to it. But that whole scene, is dubbed in English. And then whenever she's revealing to Ogata, her love interest, and Steve Martin about the oxygen destroyer, they go back and it's, in regular Japanese. So
I will touch a little bit on the editing. I don't mind that as much. I mean, I understand why they did it, but I also kind of like the fact that they kept a lot of it in Japanese because it made it feel a little bit more authentic.
mm-hmm.
Especially when Steve Martin's having to ask, "Hey, what are they saying?"
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
But I understand what you're saying, where it was like it would get dubbed at like weird, awkward moments because they kind of had to, because it's like, well, Steve Martin's not here and Tomo's not here, so we can't really have anyone just come in and translate.
Mm-hmm.
And how does Steve Martin know what these two are, what private conversation these two are having? So, but I get what you're saying. It was one of those where, yeah, it's a noticeable like nitpick, but at the same time, it's like you understand why they did it.
Mm-hmm. But what did you think? As someone who's watched Godzilla -1, it was in that movie, like I said, is very destructive, very emotional, very powerful. Just talking on the Godzilla scenes in general, just like him appearing into the ocean or coming to arriving on land in Tokyo, and like all the destruction of the city, like what are your thoughts on that? Like, how does it compare?
Well, asking how a movie made in 1954 compares to a movie that came out in 2023. I think the best way to look at it is to look at it through the lens of how it looked at the time to people watching it.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I'm a guy that watches a lot of Toku. I like my karate bug men. I like my giant dudes in rubber suits. I think all the scenes were great in this movie. You have to keep in mind, to those who are skeptical to go see this movie because it's old. Yeah, it is. But the effects in this movie are dated by today's standards, yes, but back then it looks great.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
I feel like the use of miniatures, actually, interesting story. A lot of the use of miniatures here, A.G. Tsuburaya would use that when he would go a decade later and do Ultraman.
Mm-hmm.
So Godzilla is the genesis of tokusatsu. So I feel like just on that alone, it deserves mass respect just for like all the visual accomplishments and feats that it did in this movie. It looks great.
Oh yeah, agreed. And for me, this is like I know I've seen every Godzilla movie, and I've, seen all the variations of him, like where in this one, it's more serious. He's a force to be reckoned with. And in the 60s and 70s, he becomes more of a hero / anti-hero, and it becomes a little comedic at times. And, but
we've all seen the clip.
Yep. But this to me is Godzilla, like a titanic force to be reckoned with. He's here, and he's going to destroy. And, that to me was always Godzilla. Like, he wasn't like here to fight another monster and save mankind or be the balance of nature or bring the balance of nature as he does in the new films, he was a monstrous force of nature, and I've always really loved this movie, because I always felt like if a giant monster like that appeared, this would be like how I would envision him.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say he's the result of humanity's hubris.
Yes, exactly. And it's just whenever I see, whenever I think Godzilla destruction, I envision this or in Godzilla -1. But I will say, I know that you haven't seen a lot of Godzilla movies, but one of the biggest, criticisms I've heard is that the human characters, they want a good characters with the humans, Yeah, sure, we're here to see Godzilla wreak havoc, but we also want a good story to go along with it. And there's a handful of movies that I would say had great human characters. And this is one of them, like both the original 1954 and the original 1956. And Godzilla -1, actually. That was one of the best, praises the film got, is that it had a great human story to go along with it.
Oh, dude, I could gush for the next 30 minutes about why I feel like the cast of Godzilla -1 is great and why I'm very skeptical on any sequel, because I feel like they just deserve to be happy going forward. But no, I agree with you. As far as I could say for the human characters in this movie, again, you've got the perspective that you've seen both the films. You've seen the original and this. Unfortunately, I have not. I want to see it, and I think from what little I got of the Japanese cast in this movie, considering I watched an abridged version of the original story, I can't say I cared an insane amount about them. Not to say that I didn't care at all. It's just, the whole story with Emiko and Sonozawa and her love interest didn't get. I feel like that's kind of the biggest problem this movie had, was because Stephen Martin is the audience surrogate character. He can't really take over the plot, and unfortunately, we can't spend a whole lot of time with Emiko and her crew, because we'd have to dub over all their lines, and they didn't want to do that in this movie.
Yeah, I will say I do agree with you on that. We don't spend that much time with them, and it does the relationships between. There's more depth between the relationships of the human characters in the first one, and it gets a little deep. And so yeah, I definitely recommend, like, whenever you get a moment, like, I think it might be streaming free, like, it gives you kind of whiplash in a way. Like I said, whenever I first saw Godzilla King of the Monsters, that was always like the way I would watch the original. But then once I actually did watch the original, I was like, whoa, that is deep. But the original, I will go ahead and spoil, is better than Godzilla King of the Monsters, because there's more depth, there's more characterization, and all the Godzilla destruction feels more emotional and deep. And so yeah, whenever you get a chance, I do highly recommend it.
If you look at the poster for the original Japanese and then you look at the English one, but they're both good, but Japanese one has a lot more feels a little bit harder. And I think a lot of it is because a lot of the people that worked in that movie lived through World War II. They lived through the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that a lot of Godzilla destroying Tokyo. Yeah, it's channeling a lot of that.
Yeah, and I've seen the original 1954 poster, and you can actually, I know the audience can't see it, but you can see the poster for Godzilla King of the Monsters right behind me. Yeah, it's more sci-fi-ish, I guess, if like sci-fi monster film, but the original is like you get a good sense of like what the movie's, not just like what the movie's about, but like, the message it's giving. Like, okay, when you see this movie, you're going to get something very real and very in depth.
Pure dread.
Yes. One of my other negatives that I had, But like I said, like with the positives, you know, the movie is still really enjoyable. The Godzilla destruction scenes are good. I mean, we're basically, they didn't do anything different with like on the with the exception of a few edits. You know, with all like the Godzilla scenes and everything like that. You still get what you saw from the 1954 film. It's abridged, but you know, it's still there, but you know, it's just lighter. But one of my biggest negatives is that they got Godzilla's like height wrong. He's and Godzilla King of the Monsters, Steve Martin says that he's as tall as the 30-story building. And Dr. Yamane says, you know, based off the description of a photograph, that he's over 400 feet tall. I'm just like, no, he's not.
I remember that. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not true.
No, like if he was over 400 feet tall, he'd be as tall as the Godzilla from the legendary films.
I think a lot of that was they wrote that script in a hurry. There's some discrepancies. That's probably why.
Yeah. In reality, in this film, Godzilla's about 50 meters. I think he's about 150 feet, and which still big, but he is not 400 feet tall. Like some of the Godzillas from the later movies towered over him, and especially the Heisei era, and but which is the late 80s to 90s Godzilla. But that was like the only other nitpick that I had. I was just like, he's not 400 feet tall. Come on, guys. I like, it's kind of like you were saying, they probably just wanted to like, hey, let's make him even more scarier by just saying that he's bigger, you know? I'm like, yeah, but when you look at some of the, like, you can see him standing next to some of these buildings. Those buildings aren't 400 feet tall.
No.
That's a skyscraper.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure those did not exist in 1956 Tokyo. Just
no. But did you have any other negatives for the film?
Well, like I said, a lot of the original context of the film, I feel like that's just what I'm needing, is just like, if I watch the original film, I'll have a lot more context for the characters.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as other negatives that I can think of, no, not really. I think for the most part, it's a solid movie. I do think, like, the way it was edited, the way it was put together, it was oddly respectful in certain parts, which, given the time and era which it was made, pretty cool. Even though, I mean, respectful of the fact that they didn't just like dub over every single line.
Mm-hmm.
It gave more authenticity to make it feel like it was like he was really there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was edited well. I think it was acted well for the most part. No, I can't think of really any other issue, because I mean, say what you will about it, it's a fun movie. It's not as deep as the original, I imagine it is, but it's, you know, I guess if you're one of those people, you just want to know what Godzilla is about, yeah, you should watch this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But
Agreed.
you know, as far as negatives, I don't really have any.
What about Raymond Burr's performance? Like, we've touched on that, you know, he's just basically there for, you know, he's the audience surrogate.
He's a React streamer.
Exactly.
That's what he is. That's pretty much what he is.
I thought Raymond Burr's performance, though, was pretty good. It was almost like Rod Sterling in a way. Like, you know, the episodes of The Twilight Zone where you'd see Rod Sterling like narrating like the events of the episode that are about to happen. It wasn't like as good as Rod Sterling, I would say, but it was like kind of like touching on that. And
yeah, I would agree with that.
If I were to rate this movie, like the movie, the original 1954 movie, like definitely I gave it like I believe I gave it like an A or A plus. This one, you know, I would give it like an A minus, maybe like in the B plus to A minus range, because while you're getting what you paid for, and it's a good movie to watch if, you know, you're just wanting to, like, if you're just kind of wanting to get it, like you said, get a feel of like who Godzilla is and like what his movies are about.
Dip
like,
your toe in the pool.
Yeah, exactly. This would be a good one to watch. If you want something more serious, definitely recommend the original over this one. If you want like something like real, Like if you
Mhm.
want to truly see like what Godzilla is all about, then that's
You
one I
want
would
to feel it
recommend.
right here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, feel it right in the heart, pulling the heartstrings. Yeah.
Mhm.
What about you?
I would second that. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking because it's not like it was like I said, I was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I was. I mean, I wasn't expecting to hate it, but I was like, okay, this is the American version. Raymond Burr's going to be edited in all these scenes, and I was happy with the editing. I thought it was good. Um, yeah, I would definitely say this movie is a good standalone. You could
Mm-hmm.
technically just watch this if you want. I don't know why this would be the only one you'd watch when the other one's sitting right there. But if you want to dip your toe in the pool, uh, I think it's solid. There are some people that can't watch something from the 50s. I would say please change as a human being and check this movie out.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
So yeah, guys, if you haven't seen this movie, definitely recommend it. I would recommend the 1954 version um, more, but if this is the only one that's available, whether it's not streaming anywhere, I can't remember if it is or not. I know some Godzilla movies are, but if you have the ability to watch the original one, I would recommend that one. But if not, then this one will be suffice. But if you guys have seen this movie, be interested to know what you think. Be sure if you're listening slash watching this on YouTube, feel free to post your thoughts down in the comments. If you're listening to this on Spotify, I'll post a link to where you can uh, find this YouTube video and you can post your thoughts there. But before we go, again, Tanner, just want to say thank you so much for joining us on this discussion, and really glad that you got a chance to see the film. And I'm glad that you want to, watch more Godzilla films. Would definitely love to have you on again because I want to hear some of your thoughts for some of these other Godzilla films.
Bro, I feel like if I watch Shin Godzilla, I'm not gonna be the same person because I've seen clips from that movie. It's horror inducing, and I'm all for it. I think that's gonna be my next watch.
Shin Godzilla. I actually, let's go ahead and how about we just go ahead and would you like to join me for the Shin Godzilla discussion?
I am all here to preach the good word of Hideki Anno, so yes.
Okay, we just made it official here. We'll have Tanner back joining us when we discuss Shin Godzilla because I definitely want to talk about that one. But dude, Tanner, thank you so much again for joining us on the second episode of Project Monster Island. It was so great to get a chance to work with you again. And again, we really appreciate you being on today, man.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, guys, be sure to go check Tanner out on his YouTube channel. You want to go ahead and
Yeah, you can find me at the Scarlet Writer's Geek Corner at youtube.com. You can find me at Scarlet Writer at Blue Sky. Just Twitter's a cesspool. So yeah, that's where you can find me there. I make videos on stuff I just happen to be into. There's no real particular rhyme or reason to any of it. So if you like that kind of stuff, feel free to check that out.
awesome. Yeah, you've been recently discussing like Carmen Rider and everything, things of
Mm,
that nature.
some stuff like that. I cover toku, anime. I like to dig into some comics sometimes and maybe some movies. So hopefully sometime in the next 200 years, I get to all those projects I want to do.
I feel you on that, man. I'm still, trying to decide where in my timeline I'm going to get some projects done. But yeah, so yeah, I definitely feel you there. But yeah, guys, definitely go check Tanner out at the Scarlet Writers Geek Corner. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us on the second episode of Project Monster Island. And be sure to stay tuned for episode 3, where we're going to discuss the film Godzilla Reigns Again. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. And be sure to stay tuned for the next episode of Project Monster Island. You guys have a great one.